Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This is Langley Outdoors, the place where we not only talk about what's going on in the gun world, but also how we're going to fix it together. And the content that I'm going to break down right now is within the actual debate from the VPs last night between Vance and Walz. There was a little exchange around gun violence and the gun violence epidemic, gun control, and I want to break it down because there was some stuff that I did not like that Vance said, and of course there's stuff that Walz said that I didn't like because, I mean, let's face it, he's a gun-controlling socialist from Minnesota. But other than that, what we're about to break down is my take on how the actual debate went when it came to gun control versus gun rights and solutions around the problems that we face. Everything will be linked in the description box below. I can't wait to hear what you guys think, and of course, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn the notification bell on if you want some two-way freedom spread, not only to this generation, but the next, from West Coast, East Coast, South to North. Please hit that button, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's get it! Beautiful people, we have got to talk about this right here. Let me show you what we're dealing with. So from the debate last night, if you guys missed it, Vance mopped the floor with Walz as an overall overview. Even the leftist media is saying it, and we did a video earlier today all about that. But this specific point is all about the gun control portion that the media brought up. It doesn't come up in the actual presidential debates, but it came up in the VP debate. And I want to show you a few things that I liked, I didn't like, and just my take on it in these few minutes that were spent on it. But without much further ado, let's get into this. Again, last night, VP debate.
Vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms.
Of course, that's a lie. We've disproven it multiple times. We've provided sources. It's a complete fabrication. It's been fact-checked by the Washington Post. Anyway, let's continue.
Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Laura, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous.
All right, so right off the rip. Again, I'm just going to do this in real time and pause it as my thoughts come together on this, because I did watch it really in live. In live. I watched it live. So the one thing that Vance, I did hear that I appreciated, he gave it over to beyond the federal government. So like, I do not like the framing of gun violence epidemic being the number one cause of death of children in the United States, because it's not, it's a lie. Now, would I have loved him to come out and say that? Yes, I would have loved for him to say it. But then he goes down the road of using common verbiage. Again, the example of a parent giving a kid a gun when they're a danger versus the kid stealing a gun, that's a good example. What happens if, then, what about, right? However, where he's about to go, I don't absolutely love it. Check this out, and you guys can let me know in the comments field if you agree or disagree with my analysis, but let's get it.
Look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better.
Okay, so right there, I do not like, with the strongest terms that I can possibly put forward, I do not like adopting the narrative that the left has put forward, utilizing the verbiage the left has put forward in relating to the point. The gun violence epidemic, that's basically reinforcing and accepting the idea that the left has put forward that guns are the problem, the inanimate objects are the problem, our Second Amendment rights are the problem. By utilizing and repeating the verbiage that they're using, you're giving it credibility. I do not like that he used the phrase gun violence epidemic, because it's not a gun violence epidemic, it's a crime epidemic in which people use guns. There is a high degree of difference in that verbiage. You start using their language, it becomes commonplace and accepted, and they no longer have to fight for that point. Now it is just built in the cake. I don't like that at all. That's a very strong point that I want to illustrate. Now, let's continue.
And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago.
All right, so now this was actually a very shrewd moment. I do not like, again, the same repeat of the same verbiage, but he is tying it back to Kamala Harris to a different point among immigration, the border policy, and illegal guns. Now, something that he did that I really liked there was he highlighted the fact that 90% of the crime in this country perpetrated with a gun is from illegally obtained firearms, whether it be felons, whether it be criminals, whether it be trafficked, all of these different pieces. That speaks to a different problem than the gun's existence. That's really important. Now, as we continue to go forward with this, that's a really good point. Again, earlier he said, I'm going to leave it up to the state, local authorities. A parent gave a gun or a parent had a gun stolen. Okay. Repeated the gun violence. Don't like that. But now we're talking about illegal guns and illegal criminal activity, which points to criminals. I do like that. But let's continue.
But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
All right. So the way that he wrapped that, basically tried to appeal to the middle, basic bipartisan common sense. Okay, that's the strategy. Same thing he did with 90% of crime guns. Same thing they did. We need to stop this. Okay, fine. Hardening schools, very good. I like it. I'm down. The way that he couched it, unfortunately, this is the reality that we're in, so we can stop the problem. Harden the schools, protect the children. I agree with that sentiment. You're kind of leaving open a little bit of a wiggle room for yourself in his stances. But again, this is a vice presidential debate where he's trying to do no harm and he's trying to address the problem, but not provide uber amounts of specificity, because that can get him in trouble either on the right or the left. Now, Tim Walz, we know where he's going to go. He's going to go straight to ban everything under the sun. But listen to what he actually says. I'd give Vance on that answer probably a 7.5 to an 8, only because I don't like the way it was framed in his response. But you know, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. It is in the VP debate, and he did address it fairly well. But let's keep going.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out.
All right, this is a really important piece. He appealed to emotion, no shock there. That's what they always do on the gun controlling left. I'm a hunter, I am a firearm owner, but we have to acknowledge that the Second Amendment is there, but our first priority is to our kids. Now, I want all of our children to be safe. I want no one to be impacted in a negative manner by violent crime. However, this is a very important piece. The first priority of the Constitution is not to guarantee safety. That's something that is a consistent theme with the left around gun control. Kamala Harris said the exact same thing. The freedom from fear of gun violence. Guaranteeing the freedom of fear from gun violence. You will not be afraid. I'm guaranteeing you safety from fear. So understand, while the Second Amendment is there and we see it, we have to understand some other things that are very important. It's really key that you understand what he just said. The Second Amendment exists, but we got to look over here first. False. The fact is, these are rights within the Bill of Rights. It's number 2. This is really, really important to understand where this guy is going. I see the Second Amendment. I'm a firearms owner. I'm a hunter, but You know, you got to see it's there, fine. But anyway, over here, it was never, we have to respect the Second Amendment. We have to honor the Second Amendment. We have to honor the blood, sweat, and tears of those that came before us to give us the Second Amendment, the sacrifices that provided the freedom of which we take advantage of. This right here is the key point. Let's not look at any of that, though, and let's look at this guaranteed safety. Let's continue.
In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
All right, so again, very heavy on emotion, very heavy on I don't want the kids to be any type of discomfort for security. Again, the question becomes, if we're securing everything else on the planet, why are we not securing our schools when there's an obvious soft target problem? Now, again, the problem that we have exists in our hearts and our minds in this country. Morality has gone down the toilet. The big thing that I want you to hit here is we can respect the Second Amendment, but it's always a but. It's always, we don't need these guns, but they're not going to take your guns. They're just going to go into the sanctity of your own home and make sure you are being responsible within your own affairs. That is literally what Kamala Harris said to a constituent around red flag laws. She's going to take assault weapon bans through executive order on day one, within the first 100 days, if Congress does not act. I can go all day on this. But you're watching, particularly Walz, dance between this. We want to take the guns, but we don't want to take the guns because he doesn't want to do any harm to Kamala Harris. Check this out. Let's keep going.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that you're doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland.
See, there you go. Again, gun violence problem. He's reiterating verbiage that's from the left.
First of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
All right, so one thing that he's done here, and this is actually a pretty good point, Vance is really navigating. I mean, honestly, you can see him calculating. Hitting the fact, again, that it's criminals in big cities. It's 90% of the violence is from illegal guns. I mean, like all of these things, tying it back to the border, tying it back to immigration, tying it back to loose on crime policies. He's doing an excellent job of tying all of it together. The one thing that I really do not like, and I'll reiterate, is he consistently goes back to their verbiage of gun violence epidemic. That is a problem. That can't become commonplace in our society on the gun rights side of things, because that is not an accurate assessment of what's happening. And it seeds them ground on the gun control side to where they can fight for something else, which is even more obnoxious. Anyway, let's hear from Walz one more time, then we'll wrap this.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used.
All right. Everyone knows that he wasn't friends with school shooters. That's not what he meant. What he meant was friends of school shooting victims. That's what he meant to say. It is a terrible mistake on how he delivered it. But anyway, let's just keep going.
To teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves.
All right, so I really want to hit on this piece really quickly. This is an important thing that you have to understand that they do. In their gun violence statistics, as they call them, the violence in the United States, they include suicides and they include homicides. You have to understand that. Suicides takes up 2/3 of that portion, okay? So of 45,000, 44,000, somewhere in there per year, you got about 2/3 that are, about 30,000 that are suicides. And there's different demographics and everything's tied into it. We cover it all the time on this channel. But you have to understand, he even tied gun violence into the suicide epidemic because that's a big part of this, but they never talk about that. In fact, he basically distances himself from the fact that big cities are the problem. He goes to Minnesota, but that's not the point. Anyway, let's continue.
And so we have and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to wrap that real quick because there's nothing really else there, to be quite honest. Protect the Second Amendment and protect our children. The only problem with that is they're not going down the road of protecting the Second Amendment. They're just not. They are consistently attacking it. But something else that he said right there is sometimes it's just the guns. No, it's never just the guns. It is always the people holding the guns. It is a stupid idea that an inanimate object, because it exists, creates crime. It's very dumb. But that's my take on the VP exchange around gun control and gun rights. What do you guys think? Let me know what you think in the comments field below. And I will see you on the next one. I'm Braden. See you later.